Hello and welcome to Statewide Nebraska's weekly news journal. I'm Jana McGuire. Many of us have wanted to get in touch with an old teacher to let them know how they changed our life. But how about a former prison inmate who tracks down his old warden to say thank you? In the 1950s, Ramon Tapia made headlines for escape attempts and leading a prison riot in the Nebraska Penitentiary. After the state hired a new warden, Ray dropped out of the headlines. That was good news. Recently, he shared his story with Statewide's Bill Kelly. It's a story of how the prison system in Nebraska changed and how that changed the life of one man.
Ramon Tapia, a tough guy armed robber, took another wrong turn in prison and triggered a riot that nearly burnt the place down.
I wasn't a very nice person. And as I say earlier, I didn't cry. I didn't have no compassion for weakness.
Maurice Siegler made a career out of trying to turn tough guys around.
The man is sent to prison as punishment and not for punishment.
40 years later, the ex-con drove to Florida to meet the retired warden. One man changed his life in a remarkable fashion.
Ray Tapia.
The other, at 93 years of age, had hardly changed at all.
Is this Ray?
Yes, it is.
Ray, I didn't remember you being this tall.
Oh, really?
No. I thought you weighed about...
Or this old.
About that
Two
old.
men whose lives intersected inside the Nebraska State Penitentiary had a few things they wanted to say to each other.
I'm kind of a product of your philosophy at that time.
In the 1950s, the Nebraska State Penitentiary was not the worst prison in America, but aging buildings made it little more than a warehouse for criminals. Albert Bovee had been chief janitor at the state capitol before he was named warden in the mid-1950s as a political favor by the governor. Untrained and underpaid guards turned to brute force before finesse with the inmates.
Were they quick to use force?
Oh, definitely. They had what they called the goon squad. And I remember when one guy was rebelling about getting a haircut, they went in there to beat him with blackjack. I was there.
20-year-old Ramon Tapia got 7 years for armed robbery, and he only made it worse for himself.
Are you carrying a weapon most of the time in prison?
A knife. I always had a knife. Got a kitchen knife and sharpened it. Had it sharpened in the machine shop.
He got caught hiding marijuana in the prison yard and later with a homemade key. Each time he was sent back to solitary confinement in a horrible place called the Hole.
It was a place where they had just a toilet bowl stuck in concrete with a faucet, water faucet over it. That was your source of water for drinking and flushing the toilet. And that was it.
It was dark, nearly without heat, and bread and water arrived every third day, nearly starvation rations.
So we were over there 30 days, and that's pretty much the limit of a guy. This guy's pretty weak and in pain. After 30 days, you're weak and skinny. I mean, you've lost all your weight.
Bad choices added time to Ray's sentence, making him a desperate man willing to risk anything to get out. A small group of inmates were smart enough to come up with an escape plan and naive enough to think it would work.
We ran for the car, but it was snow on the cars. We got on the wrong car, and it was angry. You get in there, and somebody was trying to start it. And in the meantime, Deputy Warden and some other was running out with riot guns. So the guy fired and that shot that air, and then we ducked. And then by the time they all there and they start coming on, they all had the guns on us. So we was going to get killed if we wanted to walk. We could act dumb and start walking and running, and we got killed.
More time in prison, more time in the hole. There were no rules governing how long a man could be punished this way.
Every day, it's like getting a sentence. And I think that's was the hardest thing for me, is to wake up every morning and realize that I had no immediate hope of getting out. There's nothing like losing your freedom.
Still in the basement of the solitary facility after a full month, a prisoner in the next cell shares a secret with Ray in the coded language used by inmates.
He said,
which means?
I'm going to get out of my cell.
Guards didn't understand that.
No, well, you say it real fast.
They surprised a guard, stole his keys, freed the other prisoners in solitary, and took another guard hostage and demanded to speak with Governor Anderson. In a handwritten note, the rebel prisoners laid out demands, including getting rid of guards labeled sadists and headbeaters. After 65 hours, the guards were released after the governor agreed to hear from the prisoners. Not much changed. Ramon Tapia certainly hadn't changed. It was an odd choice for a summer trip. Ray Tapia drove from his home in Colorado with his wife at his side and drove around the outside of the Nebraska Penitentiary.
As I look at these walls right here, I remember I was on the other side. We used to play handball right here by this tower.
Thinking back, Ray knows he lost touch in the summer of 1955. It's the only thing that can explain launching a prison riot just weeks after getting back out of solitary. It started in the dining hall on a hot August night. Armed only with a homemade knife, Ray persuaded other prisoners to sit down for a strike.
No, I just said, sit back down, and everybody just sat back down.
The guards retreated almost immediately, leaving the prisoners to roam the buildings and prison yards freely. Soon the fire started, gutting the machine shop, the furniture shop, the cannery. Inmates roamed the yard freely. The fire department refused to enter the burning prison.
We enjoyed the fire. It was kind of exciting to be free. We weren't outside, but we had freedom. We'd go right, you walk in a cell house, there were no guards. You walked out in the yard, there was nobody in sight. The guards were up on the walls.
The National Guard arrived and inmates were ordered back inside the cell blocks, but not into their cells yet. That night, the dark buildings gave Ray and others a chance to settle scores with inmate informers, the snitches.
Did you want both of these guys dead?
You know, I don't think I cared if they were dead. It wasn't a intent of trying to kill them, but just to exact some kind of message to anyone who snitched, him particularly, that they're snitching, you can't do that in here.
The next morning, the warden ordered the prisoners back in their cells. Armed National Guardsmen made it impossible to argue. While the prison smoked and smoldered, Ray and everyone else who started the riot were locked in isolation again. Again they broke out, again they tore up the lockup, and again Ray Tapia faced more time, this time charged with arson. What could have been just a couple years in prison stretched to 20 years, maybe more.
And I remember thinking about that, I could die in. I had never seen this until the other day. And I was thinking that I might die in there, and then things changed.
Ray remembered the day he decided to change, the day he thought about the cemetery just outside the prison walls, where they bury inmates who never leave. Boot Hill.
The other night I was out here by myself looking at that graveyard, and I kind of had tears in my eyes because I realized it could easily still be in there or dead.
Maurice Sigler worked as a guard at Leavenworth and reformed the Angola prison camp in Louisiana before Nebraska hired him to overhaul the state penitentiary in Lincoln. He picked up on the problem walking through the prison yard the very first time.
Nobody spoke to us. I mean, the prisoners that you saw, there was no animation in the place.
What did that tell you?
Well, it told me what I'd been told, that nobody cares.
The hole had been replaced by a new but no less isolated adjustment center. The warden still couldn't believe one man, Ray Tapia, had been in there nearly 4 years.
But I asked him, like, why are you here? So he honestly told me.
And he says?
I helped burn up penitentiary.
That blunt?
Yeah.
He may have been a troublemaker, but a throw away the key philosophy did not work for the new warden. He asked his deputy warden to explain.
When it's done that way, what does that do to the inmate?
Well, it can do two things. It'll make him vicious, or it'll kill him completely, his spirit.
Sigler's philosophy for reforming the prison started with reforming the prisoner.
And I got the idea that all people who come to prison aren't people who need to die there. I don't think they're all going to be failures. And I believe if there's some way that they can have, they've got a lot of idle time. If there's some way they can use their time towards self-improvement, this is going to help them along.
And that is what led one prisoner to drive halfway across the country to say thank you to his ex-warden.
You weren't brutal. You didn't rule by brutality as in the past. So
no, but
the threat of force is what how they ruled before you came there.
But you don't have to do that.
So in Maurice Ziegler's living room, two men sat down to share stories like old college friends, recalling how the warden brought the three biggest troublemakers to his office days after he arrived.
It was kind of refreshing to find that somebody would want to ask us what we could do
to help me,
to help you, and then in turn you were going to help us, because it was a community effort.
And one of them said something about being tough. I said, hold it, right there is where you've made a mistake. You're looking at the toughest guy here. I said, I've got the state of Nebraska back on me, man. You guys aren't tough.
No one doubted the new warden was tough, but also surprisingly friendly. He never had a guard at his side when he walked and talked to the prisoners in the yard. In return, there were new expectations for prisoners. Ziegler required inmates to attend classes for credit. Alcoholics Anonymous opened a chapter, along with the JCs, Toastmasters.
I think it requires self-evaluation, facing up to the fact that here I'm a stoop.
A documentary done on prison reform in Nebraska shows a calm and mannered Ray Tapia cleaning his prison cell and studying. He had decided he could be something other than a prisoner.
I think when a person comes into penitentiary, he has to adapt himself to his environment, and sometimes that's rough, and I think that's when a person rebels the most.
Here's the way I made my judgment. Here is a guy, 31 years old. Up until 4 years ago, he had never tried to do anything for himself. And now he has he's won these honors here in our little deals. He has a GED from our school, and his work record is perfect. And my judgment was that if he doesn't get out now and get straightened out, he never will. And so I know I took a gamble on him.
Ray left prison in 1963. There were a few more scrapes of the law, but 4 years later, he married Nida. Kids, grandkids, and better jobs followed. Guided by Jehovah's Witness, it's been a good life, a blessedly uneventful life.
I was intent on preparing myself to go back out in society. And,
That's what brought Ray Tapia to Florida, to the retirement village where Maurice Ziegler holds court. He wanted to introduce his wife to this man.
The change we made, I do acknowledge that you started it and she refined it.
He wanted to say thank you.
But I figured that he answered a prayer, and the only thing I want to say is that looking back on it, I think it was an answer to our prayer.
For Statewide, I'm Bill Kelly.